Hey everyone, I think we can get started. So, welcome to the panel and to all of you. Thanks so much for joining here today. This is the third in a three-part series on philanthropy, hosted by Empower and by the Marshall Institute. And this one is specifically around it's to make sure you're in the right spot, if you're wondering, is from diagnosis to solution, the role of intermediaries in strengthening local ecosystems. So that's the topic for the time that we have here today. I will leave the introduction of the panelists to when we get to the discussion, but you are in for a treat. We have an amazing wealth of experience and wisdom on this panel today. So I'm just looking forward to getting into this. As we were starting the prep for it, we all realized that there is so much for us all to discuss together. And so we're looking forward to doing that here with you and making sure that we do save some time for discussion, for questions from you as well. So really, one thing just to note is that when we started talking about the topic for this panel in particular, I think if there is ever a moment for bold and practical ways for philanthropy to step up and get behind local leaders doing powerful work at scale, it's now. And so that's what this is all about. It really is also about thinking about practical solutions. So making sure that hopefully you leave today with ideas, thoughts, imaginations around what's possible, and also really action from examples of what's working today. So that's the goal of the time today. I think we'll quickly move into the questions. As I mentioned, I'll be in the role of moderator. So just really the goal here is to bring out the stories and wisdom from this group here today. But just to introduce myself to those that I don't know yet, I'm Olivia Leland. I'm the founder and CEO of Co-Impact. And we bring together local change makers and funders from around the world to make systems more inclusive and stronger in the areas of health, education, economic opportunity, and particularly around advancing gender equality and women's leadership. And our work is all about what we'll be talking about here today. So getting behind organizations who understand their context best with long-term flexible funding and ongoing strategic support in the design that they most ask for, and to really have impact at the scale of the problem in all the ways that we think about scale. So I'm really passionate, obviously, about this topic and want to get straight into it. So just one more note for you all. Please, if you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. Please do write questions. And if it's for any particular panelist, please note that so that when we get to that section, I know where to point your questions. But then from there, if you want it for everybody, just say that too, and we'll figure it out from there. So my first question, and I think I'll ask this to each of you, please, is one which I know is on all of our minds. Many of you here have written about it. We've all been talking about it, which is we are in a particular moment in the world with the rollback of aid, much of the rollback of rights around the world. And it's now time for philanthropy to step up, if there ever is one, and not just to step up, but also to think about how it does so. And so my question for you is, given all of these shifts that we're seeing, what lessons have you learned, and what do you think that funders and practitioners should be thinking about right now? So let me start with you, Fena.
All right, thank you, Olivia. Responding to your question, I speak from the perspective of a small local NGO somewhere in the middle of Indonesian archipelago. So we are not geopolitical expert, but we do live with the ripple effect of the global change. So my organization, BaliWise, we provide hospitality training for young marginalized Indonesian women. And with this current political and economic shift, it has made our world become less predictable. And with that uncertainty, it pushed us to branch out. So not only that we provide hospitality training, now we also develop other training in digital marketing, which help our graduate to remain relevant and also adaptable. This is also to help us to sustain our program by opening the new opportunity of employment. And secondly, with the global turbulence, also redirect much of available funds elsewhere. So that we have to rely more into ourselves more than ever before. But that is when we learn the true meaning of resilience. That lesson, that resilience doesn't is not built alone. It is built by the partnership and the shared knowledge that help to shape everything we do today. And as an organization, we try to achieve as much as possible on our own, but at the same time, we also need the external support to help us to minimize the negative impact to the community that we serve. Thank you, Olivia.
Thanks so much, Fena. And I'm really keen to come back to you on some of these points that you made, but let me turn first to João. Maybe if you can share your thoughts also on the same question, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Olivia, and all for the panel. Super excited to be here. So I'm João. I'm from Brazil. I'm the co-founder of a tech nonprofit that works on the healthcare sector in Brazil. Our goal is to turn health data into healthcare for all Brazilians, and one day to inspire the rest of the global South to do the same with data and technology. So in our particular case, when this huge geopolitical shift happened, we are a 6 years old organization, and as I mentioned, we're based on Brazil, and our philanthropy support was at that time still mainly from Brazilian sources. So I would like to say, as a full disclaimer, that we weren't as badly hit as some other organizations that I know of that were hugely reliant on big aid. So I'm speaking from a position of some privileged here. That's one thing to note. The other thing that most dramatically changed was actually our plans for the near future. So we were engaging with ongoing conversations with a lot of stakeholders that overnight were like, forget everything we said in the past several months, maybe even years, because that's not happening anymore for obvious reasons that you are following on the news. So it was more about our plans for expansion and for the future that changed quite fast because of this. And so obviously it was tough, but not as tough as undoing existing operations. But having said that, I think I would like to emphasize something that Fena already touched on, which is the resilience piece. And specifically, I think for me, the most insightful lesson, if I can say that, was about the mental health of our own team, myself, my co-founder, the social entrepreneurs. And first it was kind of like, oh, that's so much uncertainty, right? It makes the work so much harder to know that this can happen and you have absolutely no control over this information. And what I started reflecting after a few months and after some therapy and after some conversation with friends was that's actually how history goes, right? That's kind of life. The stability is not what moves history. So we had this now. Previously, we had COVID. Before that, we had the financial crisis. So things are always surprising us with super unexpected events that changed everything and make us feel like you have no stability. And you don't, right? So I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, but probably something very eventful will also happen because that's how it happens usually. So I guess the way I'm trying to think about it is, to Fina's point, how can we be resilient, not only in practice, in the actual work, but also in our own minds and hearts? How can we remember that unexpected things will keep showing up? And what matters is what we do with that, which is really tough. But yeah, that's what I'm at now.
I love how you both have kicked us off with this point of all the different ways of thinking about resilience and what that means in the organizations and your own leadership. So thank you for that. And maybe we can come back to that as we get into more of the discussion. Let me turn to you now, Nisha, for the same question around lessons. What do you want people to know? What do you think should be happening today? And I know you've written this piece about exactly this topic, so over to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be here with all of you. I think if there's one takeaway word from this webinar in the 8 minutes we've already been going, it's resilience. And I think that needs to be at the center of this conversation. And I do feel that right now we are in a pivotal moment. And against the backdrop of the fact that there are so many brilliant organizations around the world who each occupy a different place in the ecosystem that have a very similar North Star to leave the world a little bit better than they found it. But the reality for all of those organizations is that if the pie was this big in terms of the funding that is available, the same set of organizations are having to do the same brilliant work with a pie that's now this big. And I think what this pivotal moment is getting us to deeply think about and introspect about is what exactly is the best way to move the needle. And Olivia, this is something that you say in your article, is that the need of the hour, the call to action right now is flexible, long-term funding and getting it into the hands of local organizations such as João's and Fena's so that they can do their best work. So that people on the ground who are in tune, understand nuance, understand the needs of local communities, can be responsive to the needs of the hour. Because as Fena said, the ripple effects aren't just felt in terms of the organizational budgets of large foundations or shifting strategies, but they're felt in the lives of the people who are at the local level and working with young people, on the ground. I mean, young people for us, but working on the ground on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Nisha. And I think this sort of the very idea of doing a webinar like this and a conversation like this is exactly this of yes, this needs to happen, and then sort of both making the point and then speaking to the how of it, which I know is what we're going to come to afterwards. And so I love that message of this is what we need to see, and then okay, what are some practical ways of doing that? Which I know why you wanted to have this very conversation. So over to you, Kieron, for the same question.
Thanks, Olivia, and it's lovely to be with everybody this morning, afternoon, evening. I know it's a really global audience that we have here. So my name's Kieron. I'm the CEO of 100x, and I'll explain a little bit more about what we do in a bit. But we're focused on this single burning question of what does it take for innovations to reach the size of a challenge that they've been set up to address. And I totally agree, Olivia. It's all about how questions. But I also have a role at the Marshall Institute. I'm a professor here at the London School of Economics. So I thought I might just give a kind of a global perspective of what we see at the Marshall Institute on this moment. And it's clear that it's a very significant time of transition. So we are seeing a breakdown in a global order that existed for 50 to 70 years. That global order worked well for some, worked very poorly for others, but it's definitely shifting. Within that, you see very clearly globally a narrowing of the environment for civil society. So there's a narrowing of the freedoms around speech, freedoms of operation too, and that's a global pattern. And that links to a clear push towards nationalism and a clearer push towards protectionism as well, both of which can make it harder to do the sort of multilateral activity that a lot of impact that meets the size of the problem really relies on. And then, of course, within that, there's been a really significant decline in aid, though would always point out that those sums were very small to begin with. And locally, there have always been larger assets to deploy in support of social innovation. Whether they have or not has been the question. So what does that all mean for philanthropy? We're seeing three patterns. One is that a lot more philanthropy is becoming much closer to home rather than overseas. A lot more philanthropy is becoming closer to government direction as well. That's a pattern. Two, there's this kind of very clear tension between philanthropy both needs to be more strategic, but at the same time, there are so many more calls and needs on it. So how do you combine those two? Can you square that circle? And a third, and I really loved, Fena, as you were talking about the true meaning of resilience, and João, as you were describing kind of moments of opportunity. That is the third thing that we're seeing, that a lot of philanthropy is saying, well, this is a time of change. Change equals opportunities for new ideas. How do we get behind those new ideas? And so I think all of those are existing. I think the big how question for all of us and all of those like us and at Co-Impact who work on these questions is essentially how can a whole be more than the sum of its parts? That's always been needed, but just feels especially so at the moment.
Well, thank you all for framing this so brilliantly. I think the message, which I think now we can start to unpack, is more of here's what's happening globally, and then actually also recognizing that amidst all of this, there is so much possibility and potential. And so how do we just kind of get on with it and actually really see what's needed? So I think that's what we're going to head into now. So more of the conversations with each of you around your work, what are you seeing, and then specifically the partnerships also between, so with Nisha and Fena talking about between Empower and BaliWise, and then with Kieron and João talking about the partnership with 100X and then with ImpulsoGov. So looking forward to digging more into those, and we'll head to that. And then just as a reminder, after this, we'll then turn into more of sort of the general conversation again. So let me start now with you, Fena. So we've just framed this sort of broader context. You kicked us off with this really important theme of resilience, which we've now all been, I think, which resonated very much with everybody on the panel. So can you speak now specifically to, because the topic here is around intermediaries, so how the partnership with Empower, what that looks like for your organization, what has changed as a result? Share with us a little bit more about that.
All right. As we mentioned earlier, for us, we mentioned about resilience, and resilience for us has always been a shared effort. And that's exactly what our partnership with Empower has been about. So when Empower came to us, I was 22 years old. I had passion, but I didn't know what it takes to build something that lasts. At that time, BaliWise was small. We had few staff and rented classroom, but we had a dream of empowering, of helping marginalized young women to find a decent job and to have a sense of dignity. Empower helped us not only with funding, but also they become our mentor. They give us time, passion, and also guidance that change everything. When you're a small organization like us, we often live from month to month, from crisis to crisis. And with the long-term flexible funds, it gives us the opportunity to an ability to plan, to reflect, and as well as to grow. And with the stability and the security that we have, we're able to build a structure. And I remember a few years ago when we lost our founder to cancer. It was a hard time for us, and Empower funded external support, like a mentor to help us, someone who guide us through that difficult time. And at that time, we were facing a situation where we almost closed our doors for good, if you remember that, Nisha. But their belief walked us through that dark period, in which I'm very grateful. And now, over the years, we develop a stronger team. We have system that made us sustainable, and we built our own fundraising. So we begin to think and to see beyond survival. So we see BaliWise as a home for many young women who come from different ethnicity, languages, and religion. And during their 6 months studying with us, because we provide 6 months education, and during their 6 months training period, they're not only learning about skills, but they learn to build a community that overcome fear, they unlearn shame, and they also rediscover their potential that poverty and society once convinced them to hide. So many of our students, they quickly stand on their own feet. Once they feel that they can make it, they multiply and they amplify their impact. They help other community and they become a role model for other women. This impact doesn't just spread, but it grows. It grows stronger with every woman who rises. Let me give you an example. We have one of our graduate from 2017. She now owns her bakery and she employed 20 other women. Other alumni, she finished her study in Australia. She donates to BaliWise, saying how BaliWise program made her believe in herself. And these two are just example of many stories that we have. But from these stories, from this example, it reminds us that empowerment is never instant. And it is about the journey of rebuilding the confidence. And that confidence, we make decision one at a time. So most of our graduates, when they find a quality employment, they're able to support their family. They support their education for their younger sisters and brothers. They bring food to the table, and they also invest on their own education and self-development. And with that partnership with Empower, they make this all possible. So Empower is not only giving us money or funding, but they also give us voice and credibility, because when we work with respected donor, when respected donor funds our work, it's also it gives signals to others that we are a reliable partner, that we have systems that are solid, and that our results are clear or real, sorry. And with this long-term commitment, it become a seal of trust that open doors for us. Because Empower funds significant parts of our program that many individual donor and foundation, they feel confident to join in. They know that their contribution is not going to disappear somewhere in uncertainty, but instead it will add great value. So in that sense, Empower doesn't only support us directly, but they help attract the next circle of supporters who make our impact grow even further.
Thanks so much, Fena. Really appreciate your perspectives. And also, I would just encourage everybody to go learn more about BaliWise and the amazing work that you do. So, because I know here we get just a little bit of a flavor, but it's been great to get to delve in more. So thank you so much. Well, let me actually just switch to Nisha now, because I would love to hear. So Fena, you explained what the approach is of Empower. Nisha, why don't you share a bit now as well around why do you take this approach, especially the patient capital long-term model, and what it looks like to build the partnerships that you do? So if you could share a bit more on that, that would be great. And maybe the why behind it as well. Like why do you work this way?
Absolutely. I think I want to begin by saying, Fena, you are far too generous, because I think so many of the successes are yours and of everybody at BaliWise. But importantly, and especially, it's the wisdom of the young women that you work with every single day. But I actually want to begin with a small story. When Fena and I connected, and I actually called her up to say, hey, will you do this webinar? We realized that the first time that we met ever was 10 years ago in September 2015, when I was visiting Indonesia with our senior program officer who oversaw BaliWise's program. So the fact of the matter is we're sitting here 10 years later, and that in and of itself is such a magical story. But shifting gears and talking about why long-term patient capital. I mean, on one hand, we see all of the benefits, and on the other hand, it has not been an easy journey for us at Empower. But the pros outweigh the cons every single time, no matter how you slice it. And there's like 4 or 5 reasons for that. So I think the first is we all know, and anybody working in the development sector, in philanthropy, in the social sector, we all know that change is not linear. Change has 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It might follow, undulations of a trend line. And in order for us to see success in the long term that is transformational, you have to be part of that journey for the long run. Right. And I think in so many ways, and so like Empower was born out of the financial services industry. So patient capital is a shared term that if you want to see a return in the markets, you have to stick with your investment for a long time. And similarly, if we want to see transformational change on the ground, we have to commit to a partnership for the long run. I think that's the first bit is unless we commit to transformational change, unless we commit for the long run, we're not going to see transformational change. The second thing is that long-term commitment, and I think this really came out, Fena, so beautifully in what you just said, is long-term commitment means safety. And safety in so many ways is the bedrock of innovation. It's the ability to take risks, knowing that, hey, I'm going to pilot this new aspect of my program, or I'm going to pivot my program to be responsive to the needs on the ground, and I'm not worried about losing my funding if it fails, right? So that long-term patient capital creates spaces for learning, for unlearning, for failure, to test out new ideas, to be disruptive, to follow through on that wild idea that you may have that might just be the solution to move the needle in relation to livelihoods or gender equity or SRHR. I think the third piece is how we see ourselves as a funder. And even though we're a public foundation, we don't have a corpus. We fundraise year on year in order to fund to our grantee partners. But despite that, despite the obligation we hold to our donors to make the right grants to local partners, we don't see ourselves as an auditor of outcomes. We see ourselves as a collaborator to our grantee partners. We lead with the fact that we are all here because we're in service to young people. And then it's about building those resilient organizations so that we can actually amplify the work that we do on the ground. And I think that really brings me to the fourth point. Like, do I know, or does our regional director for programs know more about what it's like working on livelihoods programming in Indonesia, or does Fena? Right? And the answer every single time for every single one of our grantee partners is they know best. And it's just that deep recognition of where wisdom lies. So what is the role that we are playing as an organization to be the scaffolding around phenomenal leaders who can be responsive to local communities? And then I think the last thing I would say about this is our sector, for better or worse, sees scale in one form, and that is numbers, right? It is either the growth of your organization in dollar terms or in monetary terms, or it's the growth of the number of young people, or the number of people that you have reached, right? Your program participants. And we want to try and shift the needle on that and say that scale can also mean depth. It can mean creating ecosystems of change, communities of change. It can mean influence so that people can influence policy, they can influence curricula. And we've seen this across the 15 countries where Empower works, where government policy is changing as a result of grassroots partnerships on the ground. And then finally, and most importantly, I think for this conversation, is scale can also mean sustainability. And that is something that we're able to really achieve with long-term partnerships.
Thanks, Nisha. I love everything you shared here, and I would definitely encourage everybody to read the piece that Nisha just published, I think it's this week or last week, was it, on a lot of these themes. And I love what you wrote on both around the patient capital and then also as you were sharing here too, both on the sort of, as we think about on results, who cares most about what those are. And so actually as a funder, really trusting is actually just getting behind that. And then also how we think about scale, because that is so key. And there's so many conversations around that. We actually also recently published something on that. Lots more to discuss, but let me turn to you next. Now, Kieron. So I'm going to turn to you first and then to João, because we'd love to hear a bit more. You shared a bit more about the 100x model, but maybe I can ask you a similar question to what just asked to Nisha. So what are some things that you would love for the people on this webinar to learn from? Because Nisha shared things I think that are so important. And if you think about sort of what are some of the blocks, like why is it that people aren't doing this? Like it seems like we should all be nodding and saying yes, absolutely. So what are some of the messages, and then how do you think we can get through these? And I actually kind of want to ask you that same question, Nisha, but maybe I'll come back to that as well. So over to you, Kieron.
Well, firstly, it's so inspiring to hear from Fena and Nisha, but I guess that's also part of the world that we're so privileged to be in when we do these sort of intermediary roles. We just meet amazing organizations, and I'd like to think that we get to be a very small but critical part of that journey towards scale or sustainability that Nisha was talking about. If we do it well, you're going to have to ask João if we do it well at 100x. But if we do, I'd like to think it's because we can bring real focus to the question of how do we add value to organizations who are seeking to achieve systemic change. And for us, systemic change is broadly a combination of two things. It's a combination of an impact model reaching much, much further. Now, that might be through kind of scale of a venture, an organization itself, or it might be through exactly what Nisha was describing, that its approach, its way of thinking, its way of doing something gets picked up by many, many more people. And that could be in government, that could be picked up commercially, could be open source, replicated by people very, very, very widely. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that you need for real systemic change is, well, for the environment around those ventures to shift as well. So sort of an intermediary we are at 100x is two things, because I think an intermediary really faces in two directions. That's, I guess, what it kind of means to be an intermediary. So we're both a funding platform and a learning hub. So we are a funder, we're a supporter. And when I say the word funding, I don't just mean financial resource. So we do provide that, but we'd like to think of social capital, intellectual capital that we can bring to organizations like ImpulsoGov and 34 others that currently we've got the pleasure of partnering with. So as a funder, the question is, can we provide support that enables organizations to reach that much further? And we focus particularly, and João might talk about some of this, on working with organizations on what we would call their impact endgame. How does the impact reach as far as possible? And what does that mean for the decisions being made today or over the next 10 years by organizations? And then we do everything that we can to help those organizations build the follow-on partnerships and the connections that enable the venture to succeed and be more sustainable. But we're also a learning platform. So we are working, and I love, Nisha, how you describe partnership, because that's how I think we would love to be felt to be by those that we work with as a partner. So we're learning. So really, really practically, we're learning from ImpulsoGov. We're learning about what are the patterns of success, what are the patterns of failure, what are blockers, what are enablers, and then taking that insight to go speak to governments, go speak to big funders, capital allocators, impact investors, and saying, well, you essentially create the environment or the ecosystem for organizations to scale, to be more sustainable, and for their impact to scale. What more could you do? What do we learn? So that's what we are our offer. Why is this hard, Olivia? Well, first thing to say, it's everything that we do is much easier as an intermediary than it is for the ventures that we work with. So I might go to a broader question, like why is it hard for philanthropy to think in this way? I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that perhaps human nature, we tend to over-index on individual stories of success rather than thinking about the systems that enable that. So that's why I think you find that a lot of philanthropy directs as it does. The second is that if you were to look at actually how much is really captured and known and shared, it's still at times can be a pretty anecdotal world. And so it means that as a result of that, that often people don't really know what the alternate models of doing things. And for those of us who kind of work in this space, we kind of come across it all of the time. But you, as you know, at Co-Impact, you don't have to go too much further out for this all to feel quite alien. So I guess that's why it's useful to have webinars like this one as well, just to help people see that this isn't novel or new. In fact, there's brilliant practice. And final thing I would say is how interconnected it is. So for example, at 100x, we're newer than Empower. We learned a lot from Empower's model in how we set up. 100x, we're newer than Co-Impact, and we were able to stand on the shoulders of the work that you and colleagues had done, Olivia, as well. And we hope our work can in time inform others too.
Thanks so much, Kieron. And I think this message, I think that all four of you are saying also, which is that basically, I mean, the interconnectedness between all of the different things that you each said, and then also just from the different angles in your own leadership and in your own organizations, that basically the idea that especially now we need all of us, and we need all of us in all of our different ways to come together and figure out all the different kinds of collaborations to make things go further. So I love that message too. João, we want to turn to you next, because Kieron mentioned, think about some of the successes and the stories that people need to know about generally, and also just be aware of. I think you may have some news as well that you could share with us. So I think that would be great as part of this webinar, because I think one of the things to hear about from you is what are the things that you're most excited about, and also what does the partnership look like for you? And maybe as part of that, what would you like people to take away in terms of, because as we were hearing from Fena, Nisha, and Kieron, of sort of what can philanthropy look like? So maybe sharing a bit both around what you're excited about, and then also the role of philanthropy. What would you like for philanthropy to hear and to know and maybe to do in order to be able to support that? And maybe you can use the 100x model as part of that.
Yep, absolutely. So just to give some more context to explain what we do and how the partnership with 100x was so instrumental, and by the way, with Co-Impact as well. So our work basically relies around existing data in healthcare in Brazil, and our goal is to show to the system who's being left behind. So although we have a public healthcare system in Brazil, we also have a lot of people dying needlessly from completely preventable causes because we're not reaching the right people at the right time in Brazil and of course around the globe. So what we do is quite simple actually. We developed a software that shows to each city that we partner with who is being left behind. For example, in this neighborhood, you have 10 children that are not vaccinated. In this other neighborhood, you have 20 women that are pregnant, but they're not doing prenatal care. You also have these people with chronic diseases, they're not being taken care of. You have people with depression, they're not being seen by any healthcare professional, so on and so forth. All this data is already somewhere buried inside the Brazilian healthcare system. So we don't collect any data, we just change the way the data is presented and present them at the right time to the right person, to a nurse, to a community healthcare worker, for example. And just as important, we also nudge the citizen themselves, right? So we can use the same data to say, hey, you, Maria, for example, you have not done a pap smear exam in over 20 years, as far as we can see in the records here. And that's pretty concerning because this is a screening test for cancer. And this cancer specifically is completely preventable, right? We have a vaccine for it. We can cure it with 100% almost efficacy if we diagnose it early on, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, in Brazil, actually in some regions of Brazil, we are actually way worse than the global average in terms of cervical cancer deaths, for example. So the situation is quite concerning, although you would think, well, they have a public healthcare system. Shouldn't things be right? But we don't get the right information at the right time to make the system work as a whole for everyone. So that's what we do, both the identifying these people to the local healthcare workers and texting them directly saying, hey, you need to take care of this specific dimension of your health in a preventive way, because that's very key. So the way we do our work is with a city-by-city partnership. And because it's very tech heavy, it's a digital product, we were able to scale by ourselves quite a bit. So we are now at 300 cities that we partner with, which is on one hand, very exciting because that's almost 3 million people that are directly being benefited from this work. On the other side, it's not nearly enough because in Brazil alone, we have 170 million. So we work with 3 million. We have 170 million people that have no access to any private healthcare and rely exclusively on those services that we work with. City-wise, we work with 300. Brazil has 5,000 cities. So we are not even close to the whole demand. We ourselves have a wait list of over 1,000 cities, meaning cities whose mayor or health secretary reached out to us in our website and said, hey, I heard about you. I would love to get access to this. But we are the bottleneck. We have, unfortunately, to say back, we cannot do that. We don't have the capacity, the team, to do this for all the cities that would like that to happen. So that's concerning. And I say it's a good problem in the sense that we are apparently solving a problem, so there is demand. But as an NGO, and with all the constraints that we discussed, including funding, it's really hard to be at the scale of the problem, right? So our goal here, our plan for the future is to partner with the national government of Brazil so that we can reach the entire country, and then hopefully we can inspire other countries as well. And the news that Olivia was talking about are actually very new. They are from yesterday. So what happened is after literally 1.5 years of work, we managed to sign our formal agreement with the Ministry of Health, where they create the legal path for us to transfer our products and our technology to the federal government so that it becomes public policy, and then it can be deployed quite fast to the entire country without changing much our own operations, which is key for sustainability as well, right? So there's a lot of work to do still. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be on Monday, but we now have the legal pathway, and that's very, very important. It's a totally necessary condition for all of this to happen. And to the point of the support, right? It took us 1.5 years. It was about building the right relationships, both with people in office, holding office today, also people that are civil servants that are going to be there for decades, navigating the legal structure and understanding the incentives and the priorities of the government. So a lot of work. It now worked. We're super, super happy that it ended up this way. It's a 5-year agreement, so it's way beyond any specific administration, which is also very strategic. So yeah, I'm super, super excited about that. And for this kind of work to be possible, you definitely need your partners and your funders to understand how important it is and be patient, as Fena mentioned, and just know that this is the way you do system change, right? Because the alternative, and to be honest, that's where most of our funders 2 years ago and earlier were excited about, was the number of cities, right? So like, oh, we were in 100 cities, that's really cool. When are you going to get to 200 cities? And what about 300 cities by yourself, right? And that's what we did until 300. I think it was important for the product development, testing the impact, doing rigorous impact evaluations. But the ideal strategy is not to go from 300 to then 350, then 400 until 5,000, because it's going to take decades, right? And it's probably not sustainable. There's a lot of issues with that strategy. But it wasn't hard for some of our funders to say, hey, you know what? We're going to hit a pause on this. We're not going to be onboarding one city at a time moving forward. We're going to spend a lot of time trying to partner with the federal government, because if it works, we go from 300 to 5,000, basically overnight. Some funders are very understandable of this, and more than that, they support that intentionally. And 100X was definitely one of them, which was one of the first international funders we had. Also opened up a lot of different doors for us, including getting to know other organizations like Co-Impact. But this is not very common. In Brazil, it's even less common. So we actually had a bit of resistance of like, oh, wait a minute, why are you not doing more to scale to 10 more cities, 20 more cities? And we were like, well, because this is the same time we need to do the big jump, right? The big shift, the almost actually 100X increase in the scale with a single partnership. So that is, yeah, that's what I think we can see more of that, of philanthropy that understands the key strategy behind system change and has the patience to bet on these partnerships as opposed to just wanting you to scale your own operations more and more.
Well, first of all, huge congratulations, João. That's big, big news. And I love that you're joining us on the webinar in the midst of all of this happening. So thank you for doing that. And congratulations. And looking forward to learning more about all of that. I also think one of the things that a number of you actually mentioned is a question I'd like now to ask to all of you, which is around the very topic of this conversation is around intermediaries and the role of intermediaries in philanthropy. And sometimes intermediaries actually, and not all intermediaries, obviously it's a very broad topic, but sometimes intermediaries can really be there to support around systems change, around more sort of contextually relevant organizations that are rooted in the communities, a lot of the things that actually intermediaries can do. And sometimes it's helpful to ask the question, I think it was you, Nisha, in our prep call that said we should always ask these questions that are sort of the opposite so that we can actually have a chance to engage with it as well. So why would you be skeptical as a funder of intermediaries? What is it that you'd be like, boy, so what would you say to the ones that are skeptical? So what would be the response for those that are skeptical? Now, I think maybe you want to jump in. Otherwise, maybe since I just put you on the spot, Nisha, maybe I start with you and then we can go around.
I'm happy to be put on the spot, Olivia. It's all good. You know, here's my provocative statement: is maybe the skepticism is not all bad, right? Because there are intermediaries and there are intermediaries. And I think as a funder, whether you're an individual, whether you're a private foundation, whether you're a corporate foundation, it really is about asking, I think there's two very critical questions. One is, what is the value that the intermediary is adding? Is this intermediary just a pass-through who's going to take $100 from you, keep $5, and pass $95 to a local partner on the ground? Or is this intermediary going to add value? And there's a myriad of different ways. I mean, I think what the conversation has the conversation until now has brought up is that 100X and Empower have such different models, but yet there's so much synergy and there's so much alignment because the North Star is exactly the same. And the North Star is our grantee partners know what they're doing. So what is the support that we need to create around them in order for them to thrive? Right? In order for João to be as successful as he can be, for Fena to be as successful as she can be. So I guess my short answer is yes, the skepticism is warranted. And for those who are walking the walk and viewing their role in partnerships with local partners on the ground, what it does is it enables us to allow our local partners to do their best work. Right? They're focused on being responsive to what's happening on the ground. Our partners are focused on the needs of the community, and we take on the rest. We absorb the volatility in the market. We absorb, the funding crunch, and what we pay forward to our grantee partners is that security that we're going to be right here. And that's one part of it, which is financial. But the other part of it is when you're being responsive to local communities, and this has happened fairly often, is our grantee partners have said, oh my God, we need to work with men and boys in the ecosystem, and we don't know how to do it because we've been working with very young adolescent girls our whole life. What do we do? Right? And that's where we come in and say, well, we have this amazing partner who's done it before, and we're happy to co-learn on this journey with you. So it is about building capacities, about networks, about connections. And what that enables is really for best practices in philanthropy to come up and shine. And I don't know if I have enough time, but I want to tell this one story very quickly. which is about 5 years ago, we were looking at best practices in working with very young adolescent girls. And all of the research, and I am an academic and I wear that hat very proudly, as well as my practitioner hat, but there was very little research on SRHR programs for very young adolescent girls. And we're like, well, let's go and see what's happening on the ground. And our grantee partners literally looked at us and they were like, come on, Empower. We've been doing this for 25 years. Like, none of this is actually rocket science. And I think that's what really, that's one example of where ingenuity and innovation lies.
I might jump in there. I couldn't agree more with Nisha around do intermediaries add value? I mean, that's a critical question. Now, firstly, do those that we partner with say that we add value? And I'd like to think that they do, but that's got to be the critical question. But then, are we adding value to those that we're often channeling funding from as well? Where I do see that value most expressed is in an intermediary's ability to convene, to curate, to co-design, because ultimately intermediaries get the opportunity to do this activity typically with many more organizations than a funder, if working directly, would be able to, and often in unusual coalitions. So both for Empower, but also for 100X. So in 100X, I would argue that, João, you probably have as much to learn from organizations not working on health in different countries as you do from organizations working on health in Brazil, because of the nature of where you are in your own journey of impact. And that's what a portfolio or being part of a community like the 100X community enables. That is a very difficult thing, I think, to do for any individual funder. But we only as intermediaries live up to that promise if we really distinctly learn from that and share that learning and share it widely and use it to kind of inform our own practices too. One thing I think the intermediary world could do better is work more closely together. So we tend to be pretty good at saying who we think are great organizations to each other. I think there's a more mixed picture on how well that we all learn from each other as well. And sometimes the relationships are really strong, and hopefully on this call they feel that they are. But I don't think that's the kind of universally the picture as well. And that might be also why some questions can come and saying like, are intermediaries adding value or not?
Thank you both. I want to go to the next question, but I'll just put my +1 on all the things that you said. I also think this point, and part of why I wanted to do this conversation, is I actually think I completely agree that this point of we need all of us, and as long as we sort of have the end goal, we have different approaches, different things, but actually that end goal of the very conversation here, which is believing in and being there for the long term, actually getting behind in all the ways, those that actually really know their context and solutions best, and doing so with the kind of funding and support that's needed. So I love that and we would say, you have these discussions around collaborations, but then they take time in figuring out. So at least sort of learning from one another, figuring out, then also how to collaborate, I love. So let me turn to you, Fena and João, because I promised practical solutions for people on the call. And so I was hoping that you two could help with some of these as well, which is around there's a lot of discussion on sort of power engagements between funders and the organizations that are leading the work. And sometimes the conversation can be, okay, yes, I'm a really trusting funder. I really, really trust my partners. And that can sometimes be true and sometimes not so true. And so what for you, when you think of examples of when you've really, like maybe 1 or 2 examples with a funder where you thought, this is what it looks like in practice. So it could be something like, we got on a call and the agenda was entirely mine, as opposed to, they came in with their questions. Or when it came to a conversation on measurement, it wasn't, here's the things that you need to do, but actually, you tell me how you're measuring and let's see how we can support, like things like that. But just what are the sorts of things that you've seen that maybe those on this call could then do more of, that you would like to see? So just maybe one example or two examples. Maybe can I start with you, Fena?
One or two examples that from our donors and how we do with our program. In terms of program for BaliWise, for example, before we receive a funding from Empower, we do not know that it is important for us to keep data, to keep track on the beneficiaries that we serve, or we do not know that to have actually the legal and certification, it's important for us to bring the students to join our program. So as we go with Empower, we learn the importance of being legitimate organization that community can trust us, because the program that we offer is a full scholarship program. So we provide education for marginalized young women with everything is covered, including food, dormitory, and learning materials and everything. So many of the beneficiaries, many of young women, they think that it is too good to be true. This might be a trap. So this is where we learned that it is important to build trust within community. And how do we do that? So we learned this through our partners. We work with different stakeholders. We work with the government and different schools and everything to build a more effective program that we can serve our community. And another part is also about keeping the record, because before we work with Empower, we receive our students and then they finish they complete the program and then okay, bye. But now we learn to keep track their progress. Where are they now? What support they need from us? So those are the two things that we learned, example that we learned during this journey.
Thanks so much, Fena. I love that, and that the parallels are really strong between what you do in the communities and then also the relationship with funders. João, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, just to add one thing to what Kieron was speaking about previously on the role of intermediaries, which was the previous question. I'd just like to add from our own example that I think some grant funders understate how challenging it might be to just navigate the ecosystem of global philanthropy. So, for example, we learned about 100X, and it was kind of by chance. So someone that was briefly on the 100X team, I met this person during vacation, completely random, in Kenya, all right? And she was like, oh, there's this thing. It was super new. I think the first cohort had just been announced. So I had not learned about it. And I was like, oh, that's super interesting, super aligned apparently. Let's apply. And then we got in, we got selected. Then I learned about the everything else thing. So it was during 100X fellows that they told me, oh, have you heard about the Skull Forum that happens in Oxford? I was like, oh, no. Have you heard about Mohago? I was like, oh, no, what is that? What about a co-impact? I just didn't know. And I think a lot of people that are doing local work, they don't know. Like, we don't know. It's not that obvious. It's not easily written out there, or at least not where I was looking for information, not for lack of trying or spending time on fundraising, on partnerships. So that was a real game changer for us. And I think a lot of different partnerships that we have today, we can track them all back to like, oh, we learned that this was true in London when we had the kickoff week with 100X. So I'm hugely thankful for that. And also, I don't see this mentioned very often, of like the role of making these connections in a way that for local organizations might be pretty non-obvious. And yeah, it definitely worked very well for us. But having said that, the two examples on this power dynamics and all, one thing I would say that is about both examples is it is much better if you can identify partners that are mission aligned with you. I think it makes everything else so much easier. So, for example, the co-impact emphasis on system change is the way we have been thinking for a few years now. So when we see this is important for co-impact, we know that when we have challenges, when we have learnings, everything that happens over the course of partnership becomes easier if you agree on a higher level, right? If you have alignment upper there on the why are you doing this? Another example with LSC and the follow-on funding opportunities that exist. Again, doors that we wouldn't be probably able to cross ourselves because we don't know this exists, these opportunities. We haven't been, the due diligence piece, right? It's really optimized if you can have a trusted intermediary that does that and then can say to others, like Fena mentioned, like to transfer this credibility, so to speak. And I will also say that I don't know about Indonesia and other countries, but in Brazil at least, the standard practice in philanthropy is very far away from trust-based. I wouldn't even say that it's like, oh, we say we're trust-based, but we're not. They don't even say that on average. We have a few partners that do, but they're very much the exception. And it's just how things have been for a while. And I don't think they have changed as fast as they should. But just as an example, we have a contract, 3 years. It was our largest grant to date. It was a 3 years grant. It was $2.5 million, more or less. And we still have, it's about to end now, and we still have conversations almost every week of like, hey, you budget $1,000 for this flight ticket for this specific moment in time, and you only spend $950. What happened? And you're like, well, that's so time consuming. It's obviously impossible to predict flight prices 3 years ahead of time, A, and B, it was under budget. It wasn't over budget. So it doesn't matter. It's a very compliance oriented mindset. This is a semi-public institution as well. So it's the National Development Bank of Brazil. And I can say this here, recorded all of this because they know, right? It's all the incentives. And I guess that's the actionable piece I'd like to share. It's very important to understand why your partners and funders ask the questions they do. And I know why they ask these questions on what's the flight ticket difference thing. It's because they think, oh, if in 10 years from now, some court comes to audit us, they want to know what happens and they want details and they want to know that there was no corruption here. And I want documents to prove that I was doing my job right. So once you understand that, you realize that it's not about, oh, flight prices change a lot, I'm sorry for that. It's more of like, hey, here's the receipt. Here's your budget. That's the difference. That's it. You have the documents you need if you need them in a few years' time. So it's kind of like, yeah, why are they asking what they're asking, right? Trying to be on their shoes as well, because everything is trying to do the best they can, I guess. So how can you understand what that is and navigate the challenges?
That's a very empathetic way of looking at why these things happen. So let me ask one question, which actually, and then we're going to switch to the audience Q&A. So if anybody still has any questions, please do ask and then do that. But one question, because a few of you have actually referred to this, which is, what do you think it is that keeps funders from being able to do the full trust? So you mentioned, João, that it depends, right? They have different requirements that are happening now, but sort of, what maybe there's mindsets, maybe there's fears, maybe there's things like, what is it that's actually making people be blocked from being able to do what a number of you spoke about, which actually is really sort of recognizing the trust that you described that you have with your communities, the communities that you work with, and that Nisha, you mentioned in terms of sort of the nature of the kind of why should it be that trust and outcomes are in contrary? They should actually be seen as the same, right? I mean, this is sort of that is actually what will lead to it. But what do you see as that? Because maybe that will help us to think about, okay, how do we unblock? So do you have any thoughts on what those things are? And then we'll turn to Q&A.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Great.
Okay.
All of those. Please all go. Yeah. Fena start, Kieron, then Nisha, then João, if you also wanted to go on this one. And if you can all keep short so that way we can go to Q&A, that would be super.
Right. For us, the key is the communication, because sometimes when we work with a project, with a program that we do, things are not going as how we planned it to be. Sometimes we have a target of 100 young women, for example, to help, but then it turns out that we have only 90 because of some reason, because of health issue, because of transportation, because of the politics and everything. So what we do is normally we communicate directly with the funder, with our donor, in particular Empower. We have amazing program officer that work closely with us. So any issue, any problem, any progress, we are openly discuss with them and we share with them what is really happening. And if we need support or help, they're always there to offer some solution. Also with, for example, with finance. Sometimes we, same like other organization, some we over budget or we are underspend or we spend more. So this is also important for us before the end of the grants period. We communicate that, hey, actually we achieve this goal, we achieve our target, but we actually spend less money. So which means that that we have effective ways that we do. So we often ask our donor, is it okay if we reallocate the remaining funds that we have towards the next program, or is it okay if we create another project that support our current program? So to me, the main key is the communication, open communication, and be honest, because I think that's what our donor wants. And we're not going to sugarcoat our data and everything. If we failed on something, we just openly say and we admit that we actually failed on this and we're working towards a solution and etc. So that's from me.
Thank you, Fena. Olivia, you asked a question, why doesn't this happen? I used to run one of Europe's biggest foundations. So let me give 3 answers to that. One is the organization that's an intermediary, well, you're partnering with. Are they trustworthy? And civic society is political. And so who is the impact for? Which groups succeed? Which groups aren't covered by that? That's a critical question. The second is that intent doesn't equal impact. So you can be very trusting of an organization, but and they might be trying to do everything in the right possible way, but they might not be having impact. The third is that all of this is resource intensive because we're describing relationships and relationships that build over time. We're describing co-curating and understanding, and that all takes time. And that's a very particular model. And there are pros and cons with that. We should expect that the organizations where there is this intensity outperform the index. But it's resource intensive, and so it means that fewer organizations are getting that benefit. So I think some of it comes down to like, what is your theory of how change occurs? I think we're all pretty aligned here in thinking that it's so hard for systemic change to occur that you need to do a lot of different things over a long time period in collaboration with lots of partners. But that's one view, and there are other views of how systems change occur. So those are 3 very practical reasons, Olivia, I've seen why the trust isn't always there, and it's not always for necessarily bad reasons.
I can come in very quickly and just say that, and Olivia, you touched upon this, is the solution is to slowly drop into the drinking water, as we can maybe collectively decide on this panel today, and all of our participants who have joined us, is to break this dichotomy, because flexibility is not the enemy of accountability. And both can be true, and both can be held together. And unfortunately, they've always been seen as it's either you're flexible or you have a very high level of accountability. So I think the solution is for all of us on this call today to make a pact to say that, it's not a zero-sum game here, right? It is, you can measure accountability while being a flexible funder. And what you do measure is outcomes that relate to your organization strengthening, to, your programmatic innovation, your ability to strengthen the sector around you, your ability to influence the ministry or the government of Brazil. And I think that's kind of where the trajectory is going. So if we know that long-term flexible funding to local organizations is the solution, the next step will be, how do we measure those solutions without M&E being a burden upon the local organizations that will curtail innovation? It's about how can M&E be used to flourish or to be a learning tool for innovation.
And I think also the more that we can all be talking about this and showing that it is that, I think it will help too, because I feel like we're sort of singing in our own right ways to try to say this is, but also figuring out how can we singing. I'm not good at metaphors, but beating drums, singing, whatever it is, but really all together would be great. So let me take some of the questions now that have come in. And any of you who wants to jump in, please do so. Otherwise, I'll call on. But just one question that came in is in order. So, what does strengthening local ecosystems look like for you? So, one of the things that we've been talking about here is that, like, so can we measure that and fit it into the data-driven mindset of many philanthropic groups? So, what would that look like? It's actually connected to this last question as well, but what does that look like, and how would you think about that? Who wants to take that question? Nisha, why don't you go?
Yeah, I can take it. So here's a lesson that we learn is Empower expressly articulated its focus on adolescent girls almost 20 years ago. Right. And for a very, very long time, we were going, girls, you can do everything. And here's all this programming and everything is focused on you. And the biggest learning that we had was we were actually doing it wrong. Right. What we were doing was we were placing the entire burden of change on girls. Right. And this is not my analogy. It's actually borrowed from somebody, from one of our peers in the sector. And it's basically like saying, hey, you can climb the highest diving board in the world and you can jump off of that diving board without actually checking if there's water in the swimming pool, right? And that's what strengthening ecosystems mean. It really is about, moms and dads and brothers and gatekeepers and religious elders. That's what it means on a community level, is what is the ecosystem? How do you create an enabling environment for in our case, a young person or an adolescent girl to thrive? And I think similarly, in one of the other threads that is emerging from this conversation, which I love so much, is also the power of collaboration at the level of intermediaries, at the level of foundations, right? And unfortunately, there is a high level of competition, Kieron, as you lifted up in your previous answer. And ecosystems of change also mean really where do we collectively align and how can we collectively move the needle together? And those collaborations, I think we have a lot to learn from local organizations on the ground because they do it brilliantly. And I feel like we need to take that learning and assume that, that ethos in our environments, in the philanthropic space as well.
So I'm looking through the questions, and a lot of them are actually around measurement and about how are we thinking about what that could look like, and how does that fit with the conversation that we were having here. So I might take moderator prerogative, and actually, because I do want to make sure that everyone hears from all of you, and we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to leave my closing and give my time to the 4 of you. So if you could just each say one thing in closing that you would like to take away on this topic of measurement and trust as relates to the role of intermediaries and your own leadership in organizations. So I think Fena and João, you can take this in the direction that you choose as well. But just closing remarks for people, just if you can keep it to a couple of sentences, that would be great, so that way we can make sure we hear from everybody. Maybe I'll start. I'll go in different order this time. João, why don't you go first, then Fena, then Kieron, and then Nisha, if you can close us out.
Yeah, I think my main thought here is that the ideal scenario is to agree on the outcomes and trust as much as possible on the intermediary outputs that the organization is saying that is needed to get the outcomes. You can, of course, pressure test them, but it's healthier to say, okay, we want lives saved. We want X amount of people impacted in this specific way, and say, okay, we need this amount of time and this amount of money and something else, probably partnerships, etc. And we're going to get there. We can, of course, report how it's going with intermediary measurements, but I don't see as valuable oftentimes when the funder, and again, in Brazil, that's not unusual, to say, oh, I think we know exactly how that should go. And they eventually are just creating a new tree of change for the work. And you're like, yeah, that's super interesting, but that's not going to work for these reasons. And I guess the only thing I would add that is more actionable on this is we try to be very upfront with our plan and our situation. So we say, hey, that's what we're doing. There is a wait list here, right? So we need to address this wait list. We think that a federal partnership is very insightful for us, very valuable to get to larger scale without increasing costs too much. So that's what we would like to do. Before we say things like, hey, what do you think about our work and how can we partner? We try to say, we kind of have a plan. I would love to pressure test the plan, but not start from scratch, because we're not starting from scratch. So, and oftentimes I found this is helpful, and some funders actually love that you say something upfront that they already have in mind.
Thanks, João. Fena?
For us, the key is being open, as how mentioned before, how we address, how we share to our donor what is our plan, what we are going to do, and how we're going to do it, and to be open throughout the progress and share what are the challenges, what are the obstacles, and what are the needs that we, what are help that we need from our funders. That way, to give us, to make them being in the same page as us, and to share every result and everything that we do towards our program. I think that that creates the, you know, how we measure our program. So back to you, Olivia.
Thanks, Fena. Kieron?
Thank you. Final thoughts. Well, firstly, 100x does open applications for its program, and we're looking for applications right now. So if anyone in the call thinks what we've been describing could work well for them, or wants to follow in João's footsteps, do please take a look. Final thoughts on trust and measurement. Trust is a doing thing. It's all achieved actually in a kind of how you go about the relationship. On measurement, of course, measurement is important, but what we really focus at 100x is how is the impact of the partner that we're working with going to reach as far as possible? And together with those partners, we try and shape a picture of the world, a hypothesis about how that's going to happen, and then we work together in delivery of that as a partnership for shaping those possibilities. I think that is the crucial measure to keep in mind. And there are, as João says, there's all sorts of things that let you know whether you're on the route to that or you're not. But it's having that really clear and I would say shared vision that is the critical element.
I know we're over time, so I'm going to try this in under a minute, but I want to share in that I have a t-shirt that actually says data saves lives. But the caveat to that t-shirt is that I think you should only measure what you can learn from. And that's kind of my answer on data and measurement.
Thank you all so much. This is a brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed and appreciated the chance to hear and listen and learn from each of you. So I hope everybody else did too. There was a question about what the future of philanthropy looks like. What are some of the trends? And I guess my hope is that some of what we're talking about here can help to also shape that, and so that we can see collectively what philanthropy can look like. And also ultimately what that will mean for the communities that you work with, João, that you work with, Fena, and that we're all here to support. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a good rest of the morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Olivia.
So.